Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone for another episode of Bedrock and Balderstone, and we're talking about I, Claudius, Episode 9, Hail Who. In this episode, we see a number of things, but the big thing that happens is Caligula gets assassinated, and Claudius becomes the new emperor. We also get to see the full extent of the madness of Caligula's reign. Like the previous episode, we saw some of that, but he was still... I don't know, I would say he was still kind of anchored in some degree of sanity, even though he was saying he was a god and all this stuff. But this is where we really see how the madness is sort of taking its toll on him, and just how jarring his his shifts from one thing to the next can be. And it's go ahead, you were going to say something?
Oh, so yeah, it's interesting in this episode because this is the one where it's started to become normal to an extent. Like in the last episode, it's like Caligula's gone, revealed himself as being really crazy, and people are reacting to it, and things happen in response. But this is the episode where it seems to have been going on for a while, and people are, obviously at the end people do react, but it's surprising how far people are willing to play along with his madness. It's kind of shocking.
No, it is, and it's really the heart of the episode is this idea of how people are doing that, and you just see the insanity of it in the way people are behaving. Just people they're fully committed to playing these different roles, and some people are doing it more successfully than others. And it would seem that Claudius is the most successful. In fact, what I want to do is I want to talk about each moment in the movie, in the show. But Claudius, he basically adopts the role of Vulcan, and that's what kind of sees him through to the end of of this particular episode. So the show opens up with. And this is kind of notable because I think up until this point in the series, it's all been led with Claudius narrating what's going on.
Yeah, I was a little confused at the beginning of this episode because he's older now, even in the flashbacks. That for a second I was kind of confused as to is this actually before we go back in time here? That actually did throw me this episode.
Yep, and so we'll probably get back on that subject next episode, but it is notable. But what we see is he's living with a prostitute named Calpurnia, and he receives a letter from Herod that contains some loaded dice. And this is where we find out that there are ads for a brothel at the palace, where the family I think like the family and the wives of senators are going to be made into prostitutes for an evening, and basically senators have to come and pay an entrance fee, and then they are supposed to sleep with other senators' wives. Is kind of how it plays out. And there's a lot of debauchery. We'll get into that when we get to the brothel scene. But the slave that informs them of this event, looks at Calpurnia and says, even she wouldn't, have, do that kind of business in that way. And this is where we find out that, Calpurnia is a prostitute. And they sort of hint at, in the book, if I recall, Calpurnia and Claudius have an arrangement to only see each other. So I think she's either living with him or he's, at least he's one of her, he's like her only client essentially. Because there's an outbreak of VD in Rome, and so you can sort of see the relationship they have though in the scene. She's almost like the closest thing that he's probably had to a real relationship, I would say.
Yeah.
with a woman, and she does seem to be somewhat affectionate towards him, but she's quite honest about what she is and what their connection is, and so. So I don't know. Did you think anything notable about that scene, or do you want to just move on to the brothel scene?
It is notable the relationship going on in that scene. And like you say, we only get a glimpse of it, but it's until the notice comes in. It seems like a fairly comfortable domestic scene with Claudius, which is not something we've seen. Even though he's been married twice before, we've got nothing like that with him ever before.
it's an interesting. I think it's important having her in this episode because Messalina gets introduced by the end, and there's a very interesting contrast between these two characters. The next scene is the brothel scene. This is when they turn the palace into a brothel, and Claudius is in charge of manning the door. Basically, he's basically taking people's money. The scene opens up. I mean, it's like, you see boobs, you see men kissing, it's like 70s edginess, basically. It's this is clearly like the thing that is going to get people to the tube, I think, is the promise of flickers of nudity and sex. By today's standards, though, it's probably pretty tame, I would say.
On the whole, I mean, it's, visually it's tame, but I mean, obviously it's a pretty disturbing setup on the whole, though, what's happening there.
And obviously they're competing with what the other Caligula movie, which was not nearly as tame. I don't remember when that came out, though, so I don't know if it was. I think it was around the same time, wasn't it?
It wasn't around the same time. Yeah, I can't remember. I think it was probably after.
But this looks like a Disney movie compared to that version. And so. But anyways, Claudius is a senator who becomes important later in the episode. Brings his wife in and asks for help because she recently gave birth. And initially, Claudius, he doesn't want to die, so he doesn't help her. But then he goes in and he I think was it Marcus that was the one who tried to purchase the senator's wife's services that evening?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. They don't introduce him as Marcus, I think, but I'm pretty sure it was Marcus. And so Marcus, who's a character that we learn about over the course of this episode, he tries to buy her as a prostitute for the night, and Claudius goes in and kicks Marcus out for creating a ruckus, and then he kicks her out. And that's when we meet Caesonia, who tells Claudius that he's a good man. And Caesonia is Caligula's kind of matronly wife. She's much older. She's about 10 years older than Caligula. Not much older, but older than him. And she's not supposed to be particularly pretty or glamorous, and she comes from a humble background. And the woman who plays her, I think, does a really good job of getting that character across. It's always interesting to me when an actor has a line like "I'm not pretty" and it's supposed to be, but like that seems like that seems like a difficult role to have to play, to sort of play a character who has a physical flaw that you're supposed to embody, and so but anyway, she I think the significance of the exchange between her and Claudius is she tries to tell Claudius, like, the emperor basically needs us more than we need him. Like, he's sick and he needs help, is essentially what she's saying. And she seems to genuinely care for Caligula. There's like, and so it kind of sets the tone for this whole episode. Last episode, the madness was played purely for laughs, and here a lot of it is played for laughs.
I wouldn't say purely for laughs.
Laughs and terror, but you know what I mean. There was a good deal of humor.
There was a lot more comedy in the last episode. I'll give you that.
There was a lot of dark humor with the madness, and here we get the dark humor, but there's also a tone of sympathy and sickness going on here that we're supposed to be observing, and so Caligula arrives. And he's not pleased at what he sees, even though he's organized this whole thing.
I know. It's a very Caligula move.
And he comes to announce that he's going to wage war on the Germans. And we also meet Cassius Chaerea, who's I think we saw him earlier because I think he was the one who brought news of the massacre of the troops in the German forest. And so Caligula almost implies that he's going to wipe out all of this refuge that's at the brothel in the palace, and so I don't know. It's also where we see this is where Caligula sort of crowns Claudius as Vulcan. He calls him Vulcan, and Claudius gets up and I think he recites Homer and says, "From his anvil the lame craftsman rose, wide with distorted legs, oblique he goes." And essentially, Claudius uses this tactic over the course of the episode of quoting Homer as Vulcan to save his skin, and this is the thing that really preserves him. So I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this scene, or?
No, I mean it's an interesting scene where you get to see Claudia. It's one place where Claudius actually stands up and does something. Because I mean, early on, he's as we've established throughout the show, he's very good at keeping his head down and and I mean, obviously he has internal integrity, but he's generally afraid to act on it. But this is a point where he runs in and he helps a woman out, and he's like gets that throws he's willing to throw someone out over it, and it is a big move for Claudius, I think, to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and so there's a bunch of other things happen, but I think the next important moment in the series is when we actually go to Caligula in Germany, and he's reprimanding the river god, and we know that Claudius is on his way, I think, with treasure, basically, I think Livia, he's raided Livia's treasury, and he's instructed Claudius to bring it so he can auction it off in the German province. And we know that Caligula has become very paranoid, perhaps rightly so, and has unearthed a conspiracy where he's had the provincial governor Gaetulicus executed, and so he's reprimanding the river god. But the way that we first see him, like there's rain falling, and he's just kind of like peering upwards. Like we see him looking up, which just feels significant to me, because up until this point he's been like a god, and now he's looking up at the rain, and he looks like a little boy, like just just trying to stay out of the cold, and you just get this sense that he's not healthy. Do you know what I mean? Like it really plays up the sickly side of the madness.
Yeah, I think we've just had a scene too where his wife has been talking to Claudius about how he's afraid too. So I mean, I think that's the lead. That's the emotional tone. You enter that scene and you jump to him looking at the rain. That's on your mind.
She gives the BS line everybody gives about sharks and crocodiles. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. That's what she says about Caligula.
Exactly.
So I would take it with a grain of salt, but it leads right into that, and clearly he is afraid, and when Claudius arrives, this is where we find out that Caligula is at war with Neptune, and he's instructed Claudius to go by road, not by river, because he's warring with Neptune and he doesn't trust riverways. And he instructs him to send the treasure by road. Claudius follows that instruction, but he takes the river in order to get there on time. And it's sort of a situation where there was a good logic behind what he did, but it was the wrong choice. And when he arrives, he says, well, if by river you came, by river you'll go, and he throws him into the river. And he's about to have Marcus, and I think, I don't remember who the other guy is. It might have been...
I never caught his name. No.
They did name him. I think it was... Asprinus, but I could be wrong. And he basically is about to have them executed when Claudius comes back in, caked in mud, and Caligula starts laughing and recognizes him as Vulcan, and his personality is totally changed. And then we have another exchange here where they're quoting Homer, and what ends up happening is he says, okay, if the next two lines of Homer are apt, I won't kill these two gentlemen. And then Claudius has this look of apprehension and contemplation on his face as he tries to come up with a really great line to save these guys, and he does. I think he says, "Only Jove his arm extend, I can but." Oh no, that's the wrong line. It's "What soul so daring in your aid to move, or lift his arm against the might of Jove?" And then this delights Caligula, and he lets the two men go, and then he says to Cassius that the watchword for the night is "Give us a kiss," and this is where we learn that Cassius is starting to plot against Caligula. He goes up to Marcus after he's narrowly evaded death and says, "Well, he might not have killed you today, but one day he will kill us. Like we are all dead at some point." And the next scene is my favorite scene in the series, where Claudius and Caligula speak together in private, and Caligula asks Claudius point blank, "Do you think I'm mad?" And I feel like this is like the center of the story of the Caligula episodes. This is where Claudius saves himself but fails to save his nephew. Do you know what I mean? And the Empire, I think. And arguably he wouldn't succeed. Arguably it would backfire. But he has a real opportunity to say, yes, I think you're crazy.
Yeah, it's a very. I mean, yeah, it's very likely that that Caligula just would have ended up killing him if he'd said it. But that it was like some. But yeah, it's a very emotional moment because it's like because he is crazy, and I mean Claudius just going along with it again, going, oh no, it's you set the tone. It doesn't make Claudius look good, that's for sure, even though it was probably the right thing for him to do.
Well, it's just interesting. I mean, again, and this is where you see just like the level of intimacy between these two characters. Like Claudius is clearly the only person that Caligula really respects or trusts, even though he considers an imbecile and had just thrown him into a river, possibly to kill him. But what I think is clear at the start of the scene is even Caligula is getting a little bit tired of the game of Claudius pretending to praise him for being a god. Like there's something and Claudius is getting tired of it. There's a weariness in it. He's kind of doing it out of reflex, and that's when the conversation begins, where he sort of goes down that road of do you think I'm mad, and he says sometimes I think that I'm going mad, and he says, be honest, has the idea ever crossed your mind? And I don't know, to me that was like, number one, the way that I just find that like to be that's the moment in the show you have the most amount of sympathy for Caligula. And it's pretty staggering because he just had thrown Claudius into a river. He's clearly insane. He's just humiliated the Senate.
It's interesting because I think his to bring up him throwing him in the river, I find like you said, there's definitely a connection between him and Claudius, but he's offended because because they sent Claudius, not so much because of who Claudius is, because he knows what the Senate would think of Claudius. It's like that it was an insult. It's like they think Claudius is just a fool, therefore them sending him, it's more an anger at the Senate that he throws Claudius in the river than anything else, I think.
And he gets over it quickly, but that's what we're seeing is just that rapid bouncing back and forth between but the interesting thing I think about the end of this conversation is that he like you said, he says you set the sanity, it's unthinkable, you set the standard for sanity, and then Caligula asks him, like how much he sleeps, because he only sleeps 3 hours a night, and he goes on and clearly this is part of his doubts about him being a god. He has these headaches, he's not getting sleep, and Claudius says, well, the physical body is a great strain if you're not used to it, which a god isn't. And he says, undisguised gods never sleep at all. And so Caligula's kind of like, well, okay, that makes sense, but then if I'm a god, why didn't I think of that? And I don't know, I just love the exchange over the course of the scene. I don't really have much to comment on that. I just, because we've already kind of, said everything about it. One other important thing that does happen is Claudius mentions the prophecy of the Messiah and says that he's the God that the Jews have been prophesying. He says, I'm that all-powerful God the Jews have been prophesying. Now, I think it's a little... I'm not 100% boned up on my Judaism, but I'm pretty sure that the Jewish prophecy didn't predict an all-powerful God. There's a lot of issues with that statement. But and we can get into that later, because there's an anachronistic thing going on over the course of these episodes that I do want to talk about. But the scene closes with him wanting Claudius to go with him to do battle against Neptune. and then the next scene is Caligula's return from his triumphant return, except he arrives in Rome and the Senate hasn't given him a triumph because he asked them not to, and they're sort of in an impossible situation, and that sort of plays out. He keeps doing this to people. He keeps giving them, he keeps trapping them by putting them in situations where they're kind of screwed whichever direction they go. And but he comes back with his booty, which is just a bunch of shells from the ocean, and by the end of the scene, the big thing that happens is the conspiracy is pretty much solidified, because Marcus comes up to him and congratulates him for he rebukes the Senate because they didn't hold him a triumph, but they held they celebrated the anniversary of Actium, which was the defeat of his grandfather Mark Antony, and Marcus congratulates him. He says, "Oh well, Marcus, I had them either way, because if they hadn't held the celebration, then they would have insulted the god Augustus, my grandfather, who won the battle." And then Marcus adds, "Oh, and Agrippa too, who was also there, and your other grandfather." And this pisses off Caligula, who says, "Marcus Vinicius, you are no longer my friend." And Claudius comes up to Marcus and explains that, Agrippa was a man of, not, he wasn't of high enough birth to produce a line that produces a god. And so now Marcus is out, and he has no choice but to join Cassius in his plot. And so I don't know. We can get into the rest of the episode, but what did you have any thoughts on the triumph or anything that played out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty straightforward scene. I think. It's interesting just how weak everyone still is at this point. And obviously we have some of the soldiers that are plotting against him, and we had, go jumping back a scene. It's interesting to speculate on whether there really was a conspiracy in Germany or not, because it's one of those things that's equally likely either way. It's like Caligula imagining something is entirely likely, but people wanting to get rid of Caligula is also entirely plausible. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that when he comes back, the senators are, people are so weak at this point that there was no preparation or plotting while Caligula was away.
Yeah,
and I think that's a sign of what's been happening over the course of the entire series. I mean, in the early episodes, we had Livia picking off anybody who was a big, powerful figure. Mm-hmm. And then you have Sejanus, who comes along later and just wipes out a whole bunch of people more. And it's just the entire you've got an entire city of people whose just entire thing is keeping their head down.
It's the opposite. It's the complete opposite of a meritocracy. It's
yes.
It's they're just eliminating everybody who has anything that could be contributed to the empire. I think you're right. You kind of see that at this point. And then by the time of Claudius's reign, he only has like the people who are skilled are like, with like maybe one exception, are only like the most cynically driven people. Do you know what I mean? They're it's they're people who are like Claudius. They might have talent, but they've disguised it in order to keep their head, which suggests a certain amount of only looking out for number one. And so that's the that's sort of where things go. So I think you're right there. The next scene is kind of an interesting scene. That's when Claudius is awakened in the middle of the night by Cassius and told that he has to go to the palace. And then we see him in a dark room with Marcus and Asprinus, and they're just sitting in three chairs, and they all think they're gonna die, and they hold each other's hands, and they're like children waiting for a punishment. And Caligula shows up dressed like the goddess of the dawn and does a dance. And this is number one. This is where I sort of did want to comment on some of the anachronisms going on with the music. Clearly, this is not Roman music. When it sounds like something from almost like a golden age of Hollywood soundtrack, right? Like,
I can't comment on Roman music, but
but I mean, you just know that's not what the Romans sounded like, right?
It seems unlikely to me that was a Roman song. Yeah.
And so, I just want to say one of the great things I think about historical fiction and historical movies is when the writer doesn't know what should be there, that's when they plug in the anachronism, and I think that's when anachronisms work. Like it just totally worked. I knew that wasn't what a Roman, what I don't know what this was. It wasn't quite a ballet, but whatever it was, it wouldn't sound like that. It probably wouldn't sound like that. But it still kind of worked, and it was.
I agree. I mean, all throughout the series, I mean, there are anachronisms here and there, and I mean, it's because I mean, you are just trying to make people relate to this story. It's like there is a line when you're doing a TV series like this between doing total historical purity and between just connecting people.
Well,
I mean,
well, right down to the way people are talking. People talk.
Yes.
I mean, this is like modern language. I mean, this is like not how like most British productions at this time. If they did Rome, they would have been speaking in a much more austere style. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't have been this sort of street level conversational English, where people are speaking like Cockney and stuff in this show.
Exactly. I mean, that's the way that class indications are given in this show. It's drawing more on what you know from Britain than what you know from Rome. So, but I think that's fine. I don't have a huge problem with that on the whole.
No, I like it. I think it adds. I think it adds. Number one, it helps you connect to it. It adds a level of comfort and enjoyment to it, and that's what it's doing. It's not trying to hide that it's doing that. You know what I mean? It's very upfront that it's doing these things, and so sometimes that's almost better than a show that's sort of presenting itself as, this is a super authentic version of it. Do you know what I mean? And then it can get caught up in that, and so I know I quite like it. But the point of the scene is Caligula is dancing and dressed as the goddess of the dawn. He looks a little bit like Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. Like the makeup. Yeah. The makeup here is not intended for him to actually be presented as a beautiful woman. It's intended more as like a shocking sort of appearance. And he ends up marrying Claudius to one of the dancers, Messalina. And I'm curious about your thoughts. I mean, I know you've seen the show before, so you kind of know where that goes. But how do you think about because she's introduced very differently than how she plays out over the course of the series.
No, it's a very, very demure introduction to her. She's introduced as someone kind of very sweet and innocent, and it's very, very easy to believe that it's like, this is all going to work out nicely at this point. I mean, if you believe, if you have been paying attention to the show and believe it's that kind of a show. But
what's good about it too is it's a scene where replay value kicks in, because you see immediately just how smitten Claudius is. And the first time I saw it, I don't think I quite noticed that. He has a line like, "I think I'm in love already." And it just sort of seemed like, something in passing that you wouldn't, but in hindsight, where they go, with Messalina, I mean, obviously it's history, but like they really create a villain out of her. And, and just how she wraps him around her finger in that scene. And you don't even notice it is great. And so, not unless you are fully aware of what's to come.
And of course, we get the scene later where Claudius tells Caligula how happy he is in the marriage, and which infuriates Caligula because this was a joke.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. It's and that's at the so I mean they conspire to kill the imperial family because. If they're going to kill Caligula, they have to kill everybody, and it's I think it's Cassius Asprenas, Marcus, and I believe a guy named Sabrinus, and who was the senator, I think, who kind of got humiliated at the palace earlier. So Cassius is hell bent on this. This is clearly a very personal thing with Cassius, because
he's been humiliated for a long time.
The whole thing with the watchwords, where Caligula is giving him these humiliating watchwords, touch me, Titus, give us a kiss, bottoms up. And Cassius is very angry about all this, and so he's fully committed to it. But Marcus doesn't want to kill the imperial family, and Cassius says, "Okay, we won't." But then he tells Sabrinus, "No, we're gonna kill them." And so the next scene is the one you're talking about at the games, where they've decided they're going to try to get Caligula to go through this passageway, and Marcus is in charge of luring him there, and he's like nervous, and he has to keep going to the bathroom, and he can't, and they're playing a dice game, and Claudius gives Caligula his loaded dice from Herod, and Caligula is beyond. He's so happy with this, he almost doesn't notice the suspicious behavior of Marcus. And when he finally does pick up on it, Claudius assuages his fear by saying, "Well, everybody's nervous around a god." And I think it's during that conversation where he thanks Caligula for his wife, and Caligula's furious, like you say. He's like, "It was meant to be a joke. Why are you happy about it?" He says, "Oh no, you misunderstand. I'm happy that you're happy." It's like the lowest point that Claudius gets to, I think, with the obsequiousness, because he says, "I'm just happy to sort of know that my humiliation has given you an ounce of joy," and it's so, I don't know, it's hard to respect Claudius in this scene, and so but eventually Marcus convinces him that there's a Greek ballet, another anachronism, waiting for him outside, and they're going to use the back entrance because they want to perform privately for him. And Caligula goes through, the door's shut, and he's surrounded by the people that are the guards that are in on the conspiracy led by Cassius, and all the conspirators stab him and run away just as the remaining Praetorians are able to break, or the German guard are able to break through, and Claudius finds Caligula's body and sends the guards after the assassins. We have to get to the final scene as well, but any thoughts on the death scene? Because this is obviously important.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty brutal death scene that we get in this. It's very well done from a tension perspective, I think. I mean, obviously it's going to work, but I think Marcus's tension is very, very palpable in that scene.
Oh yes.
But yeah, it's one of the things where it does a good job of playing back and forth. But yeah, you do feel kind of, at least I did. I felt kind of bad for Caligula at the end there. Even for all the horrible things he'd done.
Well, the famous line that is always thrown is that was at that moment Caligula learned he was not a god, or something to that effect. Like he finally learned. That's a pretty big I don't know, that's a big dose of reality to take in. If you have this delusion of grandeur that you're a god, and suddenly you've been stabbed and you're dying, and like you said, it's really it's quite a sympathetic death. He goes from playing the god to playing the man, and in fact, his dying words in the show are, "Drusilla, I'm dying." That's that really humanizes him. Especially when you consider all the the horrible stuff he did to Drusilla. Because go ahead.
No, it's intriguing because the for one thing too, it's like I think he always had doubts about being a god anyway. I mean, it's like he needed constant confirmation of it because deep down he really knew he wasn't. So. It's something, being confronted with the fact he isn't. It's not like he was a total surprise. It's like, here's the confirmation of your worst fear.
No, and that's why I think, we'll get to it after we talk about everything, but that's why I think Claudius did have a real opportunity to actually maybe save him. But we could talk about that more. But also I think that when he says, Drusilla, I'm dying, it's not just acknowledging his own death. He's kind of recognizing the folly of when, like how he thought she wasn't going to suffer, and how, I think in that moment he realizes that he murdered his own sister. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
And I think, thinking back, I think that's maybe where the doubts of his godhood maybe stem from. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, yes, definitely a moment where he has doubts. I don't, like I said, I don't know for certain if that's where they start or if he'd already had them, but that's definitely a huge moment of doubt for him.
But yeah, so I think it's a very powerful scene, and also it's interesting that Claudius is the one who sends the Germans after the assassins, which has helped. The prophecy is fulfilled next episode, but it's the first part of fulfilling the prophecy. And in the next scene we see this, another sort of spilling of blood in the Roman streets as Cassius is going and killing all the remaining imperial family members. And the only person we see him kill is Caesonia and the baby. But it's a pretty horrifying scene. They impale the baby, and Caesonia is killed off camera, but it's a pretty brutal death. And Caesonia is probably, I don't know, the most sympathetic character in the episode. Like, she's the person that, she basically just is like, I don't know, there's nothing, she only just demonstrates positive qualities, for the most part. And she's killed pretty brutally. And Cassius is, even though he's heading this conspiracy that we all kind of want, Cassius is a pretty terrifying guy. Like, he is, physically he kind of resembles Caligula. Do you know what I mean? He's sort of pale and sickly, and I think it's related to a groin wound that he supposedly suffered. I can't quite remember, but there's a reason for his for why they present him in this way. But okay. I'm a little fuzzy on the details, so don't take me at my word on that. But I feel like he's kind of a mirror to Caligula. Do you know what I mean? There's like he resembles him a lot. They both are kind of effete. Do you know what I mean? There's like a they both.
No, I get where you're going on the physical. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that while I was watching the show.
But anyways, it wraps up with Claudius running to, I think, the east wing of the palace and hiding behind a curtain, and the Praetorians find him, and he's found by a guy named Gratus who ends up saying, hey, why don't we make him emperor? Because what we find out is, the Praetorians are out of work if the Republic is back, and so what ultimately stops the Republic from returning is just the economics of the Praetorians need to work. And
well, I think it's worse than off to work. They're off to they're off to the frontier or something if they aren't in the Praetorian.
Well, yeah, they'd have to join the army basically. They'd have to just become soldiers and not But I mean, but also I'm sure the Praetorian position pays better. But my point is, there's this institution.
More comfortable, that's for sure.
It's preserved by an institution that was created to protect the emperor. Do you know what I mean? And to protect the imperial family. And so sometimes, killing the man and even the family members isn't quite enough. Though I suppose if they had killed Claudius, there wouldn't have been many options for them. But they find Claudius. Now, interesting historical note. I know we don't usually get into that, but here it's happenstance. They just find him behind a curtain, and they're like, hey, why don't we make him emperor? And then they make him emperor, and then the German guards come in, and and I think here the German and English hostilities become a little bit visible, and the Germans are pretty much portrayed as idiots, and they say, this is our emperor. And they're like, Kaiser, and then the guy, the only line from the German guard is "Ja," and and they go along with it. But it's presented as happenstance, And in reality, I think the most plausible historical explanation I've heard is Gratus was probably specifically looking for Claudius, in order for the purpose of elevating him to the, as emperor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it makes a little more sense that it wouldn't have been happenstance.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, Caligula being killed had to be something that the people in the Praetorian Guard had anticipated at some point. I mean, if it's your job to prevent something from happening, you've also thought about what would happen if it were to occur.
And so
yeah, I have to think they had some kind of a plan in place.
And that's where the episode ends. It ends with him being, cheered as emperor by the Praetorian Guards. And he's saying, "I don't want to be emperor. I want the Republic back." But and importantly, Cassius sees all this playing out and knows he's kind of screwed. Any thoughts on the scene, the ending, or the episode?
I mean, it's a great episode. I personally found the previous episode was a little better as far as the two Caligula episodes go, but this is still a great one.
I think that the first episode is definitely one of the strongest episodes in the whole series, and probably on its own it's just stronger than this one in a lot of ways. I think what I like them as a pair. Like, they're my two favorite episodes in the whole series.
Yeah, I mean, they are a pair.
But what I like about that scene where he's talking to Claudius and he says, "Do you think I'm mad?" There's something about that scene that just gets me every time. Like, I feel the familial connections between those two characters. It's the moment when, like, I'm like, yes, this is an uncle and a nephew, and the nephew is reaching out to the uncle. Do you know what I mean? That's because again, like I mentioned, he kind of looks like a boy who's afraid of the world, and it's in that whole scene, like when he's dealing with Claudius, he's kind of acting like the junior. Do you know what I mean? And so I don't know. I just find it like a very touching scene that gets, again, one of the core themes of the series is family. And it just sort of works. So it's because of that scene. It's because that scene is what anchors all of the sympathy onto Caligula, and it does it in such a. Again, I'm usually pretty critical of overly sympathetic villains, and this
I don't
scene is.
Consider him an overly sympathetic villain by any measure.
No, he's not, but he could be. I mean, it's a very. I mean. If it's because there's so much other stuff that's it's not one note, and so there's so much else to sort of, there's so much complexity with the character. They can go full villain with him, but then they're still willing to go to a scene like this where they have the gall to make you feel sympathy for him. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. There's usually things they would have a villain not do because they know they want to make you sympathetic to him. Do you know what I mean? There are lines they will not cross, and they cross every one of those lines with Caligula. So I think it works. But I also feel like in that scene, I think that, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a 50-50 shot, but I feel like Claudius had a real chance of convincing Caligula he was mad. Now, even if he did, go ahead.
I'm saying my concern would be just how mercurial he is. It's like, he could convince him, and Caligula would go, "Yes, you're right. I need help." Blah blah. Then 5 minutes later, "I'm going to kill you. You don't believe I'm a god."
That's exactly what I would. And I think that's exactly what Claudius is thinking in the scene. I think he's thinking, "Is this a passing moment?" And he just decides to ride the wave and continue with the charade. But I think that I would put his chances this. I think he had a 40-60 chance, 40% chance of success. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think his odds were in this scene. And I think he had another 40% chance of Caligula not changing his mind.
I think the thing is, for Caligula to really change his mind and stick to it, he has to own up to the fact that he murdered his sister and his unborn child. And basically I think he'd need to retreat back to his delusion, because he cannot do that. I mean, at the end of the last episode, his thing is, "Don't go in that room." It's like, after that happens and it all goes horribly wrong, Caligula just flees the scene, and he never until his dying moments when he brings up his sister, he never talks about her in this episode. There's no follow-up. He is, in complete and utter denial. And I think anything that would force him to reconsider that moment, I think he'd have to backtrack on.
I agree with you, but here's where I'm coming from. I think that, like I said, 40-60. So I think you're right. I mean, I think the chances are Caligula would have had Claudius executed at some point. But we've seen, and there's Claudius has a brief moment in this episode where he says, there are no lions among us anymore. And that's when he goes in and he starts beating on some guy who's like, mistreating a woman, and that's the thing that ends up delighting Caligula when he arrives. So I think Claudius does have this brief moment where he saves the senator's wife and he beats up that guy, where he's thinking of his mother's call to the lions, and all of the lions that died. What were their odds? Their odds were like 10% or 20%. None of them were handed an opportunity like Claudius was. Directly like that, where Livia looked at them and said, "Do you think I'm being a bit extreme?" Do you know what I mean? He was given much more of a chance than any of those people that Antonia had in mind when she was talking about the lions, and so I think if he wanted to be a lion, that was his chance, and also if he wanted to be a truly dutiful uncle to his nephew, which he is trying to be. Yeah, that would have been the thing.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not saying he shouldn't have done it. I mean, from a purely, it's tough to say. I mean, the right thing to do is, from a pure standpoint, is that he should have said it. But it's, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you have to be pragmatic.
We understand why he didn't. I'm not saying he's. It's just interesting that this episode he says there are no lions among us anymore, and then to me that scene is sort of where it's solidified. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the last, because he has an opportunity to still be a lion. He's still Antonia's son. He was still raised by this woman who's constantly saying that sort of thing, and was willing to sort of So I just think it's an interesting point in the series for that reason. But but I don't think he's he's still the most noble character that exists on screen at this point in the series. So but it's just interesting to me that I think that I think he did have a real chance to save Caligula. Again, not in history, in this moment in the show, I think Caligula could have been saved. I think he could have convinced Caligula to step down and be tended to. He could have said, "You know what? I think you are mad," and then convinced him to maybe restore the power of the Senate. And I will take care of my nephew. You know what I mean? Like, say, like, look, I think you're sick, but I'll take care of you. I think that would have carried Caligula through to do it. Obviously, you would have had to book it. You would have had to you would have had to restore the Senate like nobody's business. But
it's an interesting question. I mean, because obviously, if he had Caligula do it then, or if it had happened. If the imperial family had all been murdered at the end of the episode and been restored, it's an interesting question, because the Senate is just so terrible by this point. Yeah. It's like anyone. It's like what would have happened if the Senate had been restored, because it's made up of the most sycophantic, weak, crawling people possible, and it's like back during Augustus's reign, maybe you could have restored the Senate. It would have been a good thing, but you have I don't know, I'm just not convinced it would have been a great thing by this point.
No, it probably wouldn't. And again, we had the whole conversation of whether it was, even at that point, whether it was a good idea, because we knew that civil war was plaguing the empire. So it's a legitimate question to ask. But from the point of view of Claudius's character, who does believe in the Republic and does want lions to return to Rome, it would have been the course that he would have wanted. It would have fit in with his motivation. But I don't know. Again, I think it's an interesting episode. There was some other things I want to talk about, but we'll have to put them on hold until next time, I think, because we're coming up on the 50-minute mark. But I don't know. Any other thoughts on the episode before we head out?
I think I've gotten most of my thoughts out as we've gone along. Yeah, but now I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right, so we will be back on next time, and until then, we have we're doing Legendary Weapons of China on Friday on Wuxia Weekend, which is a really good movie. I encourage people to watch it. I think it's on Prime and on Netflix. I could be wrong, but I think it's on both services. It's a great movie. I will
actually be able to make it to Wuxia Weekend for the first time in close to a month. So I'm looking forward to it too.
So we should have a fully restored Wuxia Weekend this weekend.
The whole team.
It's like those Marvelous Dragon Dynasty DVDs for the Shaw Brothers films, fully restored. And we'll talk about Legendary Weapons of China, which amazes me because I still feel like we did a Wuxia Weekend episode, but I think I just did I must have done one on the Wuxia Workshop, and I got them confused. But I feel like I've already had a Wuxia Weekend conversation. But it's a great movie, and I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And also House of Paper Shadows. There is for those still paying attention, House of Paper Shadows is out on RPG now. I think it's a really great adventure. And also, if you got House of Paper Shadows and you liked it, let people know, because really it's not easy to get the word out these days, and every person that tells another person does make a difference. So anyways, we will head out, and we will talk to you later.